Welcome to Great Personalities of the Bible. We all know that Samuel was considered a religious hero in the history of Israel, but did you know that he represented in the Old Testament every role of leadership that a man was open to in that day? He was a seer, a priest, a judge, a prophet, and a military leader. Today, LifeView Group leader Robbie White is going to lead us in Session 5, Samuel, Steadfast in Difficulty.
We're going to talk about Samuel, and Samuel is a very intriguing figure in the Old Testament. From his miraculous birth to his death, he exhibited steadfastness in difficulty. I found 12 interesting facts about the prophet Samuel. These were compiled by Jeffrey Kranz and was published July 19, 2016. Number 1, Samuel is a miracle child. The Bible tells of many significant adults, but only a handful of significant pregnancies. Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Perez, Samson, John the Baptist, and Jesus are the others. We meet Samuel's parents before we meet him. His mother Hannah cannot have children, but God hears her prayers and opens her womb, blessing her with the child Samuel. Samuel's name means name of God. The translation of Samuel literally means name of God, or God has heard. Number 3, Samuel is from the tribe of Levi. Not only was Samuel from the tribe of Levi, but he may have had Ephraimite blood. These are in 1 Chronicles 6:33 through 38 and 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 1. And this qualified him to serve in the temple. But Samuel was much more than a priest. Samuel is the last judge. You can read about most of the judges in the book of, you guessed it, Judges. And after Joshua dies, the nation of Israel enters the days of the judges, as told in Ruth 1:1, when there was no centralized government. During this time, God would raise up individuals to deliver Israel from her enemies. The book of Judges tells us about 12 judges, and 1 Samuel introduces 2 more, Eli and Samuel. Why is Samuel the last? Because after Samuel, Israel is led by kings. Number 5, Samuel anoints the first 2 kings of Israel, Saul and David. When the people demand a national king, God directs Samuel to anoint Saul, a tall man from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul doesn't turn out so well, so God has Samuel anoint a young shepherd named David as the future king, not the king Israel needs, but the king they deserve. You can read all about this in 1 Samuel. And Samuel is qualified to do this because of another office he holds. Samuel is the first of the prophets. In the book of Acts, Peter also considers Samuel to be the first of the prophets. After Moses, that is. This is in Acts chapter 3, verse 24. Now, a prophet is someone who speaks on behalf of God. Samuel isn't the first person to be called a prophet in the Bible. Moses is both earlier and greater, but as far as we can tell, he led an order of prophets in Israel in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 20. Now, Samuel's prophetic ministry is significant because it begins at a time when the words from the Lord are rare and infrequent. But after Samuel, Israel's history comes alive with prophetic revelation, much of which is recorded in the prophetic books of the Bible. Number 7, Samuel is a priest. He begins his ministry serving the chief priest in the tabernacle, which was Eli. Samuel makes sacrifices on behalf of the people and offers intercessory prayers to God for them. Number 8, which is something I had never realized, Samuel is a Nazirite. Like the mighty Samson, Samuel is dedicated to the Lord as a child. This dedication was for life, so he never cuts his hair. This was a promise that Hannah had made to the Lord if he would bless her with a son. Number 9, Samuel is the only ghost we meet in the Bible. After Samuel dies, Saul meets with a medium of Endor. The medium conjures up the spirit of Samuel, who isn't too happy about what Saul has done. And you can read the whole story in 1 Samuel chapter 28. Number 10, Samuel led the greatest Passovers. Hundreds of years after Samuel's death, a king named Josiah celebrates the Passover. It's such an affair, the author says, it's the greatest Passover ever. Well, ever since Samuel's day. And this is in 2 Chronicles 35:18. Number 11, Samuel is remembered for his prayers. The psalmist who penned Psalm 99 ranks him with Moses and Aaron as one who called upon the Lord's name, which is Psalms 99:6. Number 12, God calls Samuel by name twice. Samuel is one of 8 people in the Bible that God calls by name twice. The others are Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Martha, Simon. Interestingly, my God, Jesus on the cross is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Saul of Tarsus. There's a little bonus. We have 2 books of the Bible named after Samuel, but he only shows up in 1. We have 1 and 2 Samuel, but Samuel is never mentioned in 2 Samuel. And this is because both books were originally one document. Now, as we read through, start the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel. Samuel's first recorded, what I say is a difficult situation, began when he was a young man. We're told he was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, who had 2 sons who were priests, but were dishonest and refused to obey the Lord. They also did not show any respect for the sacrifices that the people offered. Now, Eli tried to warn him, but the Lord had already decided that they were to die. So he kept them from listening to Eli. Now, a prophet came to Eli to give a message from the Lord that Eli and his sons would be punished. Now, sometime later, we're not told how much later, days, weeks, months, but sometime later the Lord woke Samuel and told him he would punish Eli and his family just as he had promised. The next morning, Eli made Samuel tell him everything the Lord had said. Since Samuel had known Eli his whole life, and this had to be difficult for him. As Samuel grew, we're told in the Bible that the Lord helped him by making all his prophecies come true. Now, this only makes sense since Samuel was just basically repeating what the Lord had told him to say. And Samuel was also known to the whole country as a prophet. Now, we're not told exactly when Samuel was anointed as a priest, but we can assume naturally that it was while he was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli. He had been there with Eli since he was weaned and basically grew up under Eli's tutelage. But what is clear is that Samuel began to judge Israel about 20 years after Eli and his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Hophni and Phinehas were killed in a battle with the Philistines. And Eli, when he was told his 2 sons were killed and the Ark of the Covenant had been captured. Eventually, the Ark was returned to Israel, and it was lodged at Kiriath Jearim under the charge of Eliezer. When you move into 1 Samuel chapter 8, it was an extremely difficult situation for Samuel. It says, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, Go every man to his city. Now the next two chapters of 1 Samuel is when Saul is introduced to us and proclaimed king of Israel. After he was proclaimed king, Samuel instructed Saul to go to Gilgal, where he would meet with him in 7 days. Now during this time, Samuel delivered his farewell address as judge to the people of Israel. There was no need for a judge now because they now have a king. And he instructed them to obey the Lord and walk in his ways. But Saul during this time had fought and defeated a garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba. But the Philistine army mustered to fight once they heard about the defeat of the garrison. Now the men of Israel were frightened and hid from him. Saul waited the 7 days appointed by Samuel at Gilgal, but Samuel was late. So Saul took it upon himself to make the burnt offering, which was unlawful. Only the priest could do so. But as soon as he had finished, Samuel arrived. When he had seen what Saul had done, Samuel said to him, You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord commanded him to be prince or leader over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. After this, Samuel traveled to Bethlehem and anointed David as king of Israel. But sadly enough, he did not live long enough to see him assume the throne. I encourage you to read or reread 1 Samuel to get a more in-depth understanding of the events with Saul and David. We know that Saul grew jealous of David. David had killed Goliath. Saul made him his part of his army. Saul grew jealous, tried to kill David, chased him, and at one point in time, Samuel actually hid David from Saul. But we can look at all this about Samuel, what he went through and what all he had done, and we see that throughout his life that he had faced many trials, but his faith and trust in the Lord never wavered. In the 12 facts about Samuel, he led the greatest prayers, he gave the greatest Passovers. But looking at all this, we can use his example in our lives today. No matter how tough things get, how bad things are, by trusting in the Lord, our rewards will be far greater than anything we can imagine.